So we made it, Jamie.
We're back.
Well, sometimes we hide our guests and then we reveal. But surprise, we have a guest.
If it was like an animation, like with like a curtain that kind of came, that would be
Well, the red curtain. So
yeah.
So Jeff, this is our version of a digital green room. Feel free to explore the space.
Yeah. We don't have refreshments. Sorry.
Do you have a cowbell?
Yeah, there's no bourbon
exactly.
over here. Yeah.
You can never have too much cowbell.
Yeah.
Explore the space.
Yes.
Exactly. So sometimes we'll see. I don't know, like Jamie never reminds me, but there's a little counter in the corner of my screen that tells us the viewer count. I don't know if you see it too.
Yeah.
I don't see.
You don't see it. Oh, I get the privilege of being in charge of that. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then I'll keep an eye on the chat if somebody says something, but we'll usually give it a minute or two to warm up. Sometimes this is the time, I'll kick things off. This is the time we talk about subtopics like sports. I did see on New York Times that Wrexham has been promoted 3 years in a row, for 3 times. Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney
on Saturday. Yeah, I almost texted you, but I don't want to invade the space too much.
Well, on the
weekends, because I know you need your headspace for things. You got lots of stuff going on.
Mowing the yard and all that stuff. Yeah. I don't know, Jeff, if you watch soccer. Yeah. I mean, I'm not as big a fan as Jamie is of the football, but I am a fan of a little bit of the Wrexham, the buzz, right? So if you're familiar with the Wrexham, what are they called, Jamie? Wrexham.
I think just Wrexham United, aren't they?
AFC.
Okay. Yeah. See, Jeff's already well ahead of me.
I'm aware. Yeah, I am aware of it. I mean, I happen to hear it on the news today too. But it's a story I'm aware of. I don't watch the game, but I'm aware of the storyline.
Yeah. Good.
Yes. It's just one of those things that I've tried to, like, anybody who'll give me like an extra minute of their time, I'm happy to wax poetic about the beautiful game and how much I love it in all its forms. And this is one that's it's a cool narrative. It's one of those sort of Cinderella stories. So, and it actually is like playing out in a way that's crazy. It's almost unbelievable. Like that this club, like no club has ever been promoted in 3 consecutive years. Like they just never.
Right. Which I find that part
like
cool. And
yeah, like 130 some odd years.
And New York Times, they're so of course going to say that Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney are bringing the money, but it's not just the money. It's the talent and the energy and the vibe and the buzz and all that stuff, So.
Well, and it's a fun one, and I think both of you guys as architects, right? I think could appreciate an episode or 2 of the Netflix documentary, right? Because it's got sort of like the Hollywood polish to it, and it's funny, and it's sort of heartwarming, and tearjerker, and sports, and blah, and the whole bit. But there's also this component of this town, right? This town that kind of has fallen on it's a company town. The industry leaves. The town's sort of waiting to figure out what it's going to do. It's got the football club, that everybody loves, but it's waning as well. Hollywood comes in, whoa, skeptical of the Hollywood guys. And they've suddenly kind of turned it around in a way that's actually feels a bit genuine, and you see these kind of after effects of what it means to business and building and people, and like Populous has designed their stadium.
Oh, really?
Wow. Okay.
Like, so, and only just now, because like literally they had like this. It's one of the oldest soccer pitches in continual operation in the world. Just happens to be in Wales. But the team has fallen on such hard times that like there's literally one whole end of the stadium where the supporters usually are that had no seats because it was in such disrepair when they bought the club. So like, you know, football stadium, one whole side, no one can sit on. Like, and so as they buy it and they kind of going through the money and stuff of the club, they're like, so how can we get this all fixed? And then there's a whole episode where they're talking about going through the architectural review process for this end of the stadium. And because it's historic and all these things, and it was very, very entertaining to watch that whole kind of discussion. Thank you for my soapbox.
That's I didn't know that the stadium was like, you know, kind of well, maybe I did watch the first season of the Netflix show, but I didn't know but I did so anyway, sorry. Now catching up to today.
You're mixing it up with Ted
Probably
Lasso,
so,
which is
but
different.
Catching up to today.
So, like,
they did say that in order to go, because so they're what? They're now one rung or two rungs away from Premiere?
Yeah. One.
So in order to get there, they need to now invest even more into facilities. Because you need to be able to attract those higher level teams, right? It's a very interesting structure.
hence
Right.
Populous doing.
Well, we have this is our old friend Jeff Irizabal, right? Did you know him, Jeff?
I know of the name. I don't think and if I met him, it was like in passing once or twice, but it was years ago.
He was on the YF when I first joined, but rolled off probably before you guys came on. And so he's a former YF, but he was out of Seattle area, I think, Washington State, and the firm he worked for was like acquired by Populous, so now he is a Populous, which is, I think, that's kind of a cool name, but
which in itself was, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't it HOK Sport? Wasn't it like spun off of like another?
I think you're right.
Yeah, it was HOK Sport, and that whole division, that sports division, suddenly just got way better than like everybody else in like, and kind of the mavericks within the company, from what I heard, what I understood. So yeah.
Well, it's like a whole other.
But yeah, it's a whole genre. I mean, it's a very different kind of, thinking. But
well, sports and entertainment and billion-dollar stadiums and so on. Multi-billion. Nowadays, we're like at multi-billions.
And everybody wants a new one.
Yeah.
Like stadiums don't last 50 years anymore. Everybody wants one every 15 to 20 years. So.
Yeah, which is the whole urban development discussion, which we maybe have in the next part.
We could have, yeah.
We could have.
Well, do you want to
with his soccer love and just go into the real stuff?
I have a sketch that I found. I'm going to hide it though from you guys until we get to that point. But It's not stadium scale. It's a smaller scale, but I think it'll be a fun little segue. Anyway, aside from that, do you want to go into the show? Yeah,
you ready, Jeff?
Yep. The music goes away, and the stuff gets serious now. So, just kidding. All right. I'm gonna click the intro, and then so give it about 30 seconds, and then we'll see you in the show. Oh. Hey, Jamie. How's it going?
How you doing, Kurt? Are we still in the green room?
Oh, come on. I can't ever get it all right. Yes, they're good. Now we have the
There's lots of
now we
buttons.
have
There's lots of buttons.
yeah. It's the
And if we could just add that
telestrator
one extra
teleprompter.
button, one more button where it like pulls the red curtain back to reveal we have a guest.
Well, that's a special button. Yeah, we have a guest. Our friend Jeff Paspa, FAIA. Say hello.
Hello, show listeners. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yes, Jeff's aware that we don't have any scripts. Keep it casual, and it's all full of surprises, as are the technical difficulties with my button clicking. So, but yeah, thanks for joining us, Jeff.
It's okay.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Jamie. You really set the tone by calling out my foibles. But what else? What else is a good
It's okay.
co-host for?
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
this is the banter section of this show, so
I know. We were previously sort of warming up talking about football, the global football. I don't, because in America, football means something else, but we're talking about the footy, the soccer, the beautiful game, as Jamie always reminds us. So that was
right.
like kind of our banter of choice for the day. But Jeff, what about you? What do you like talking about? We could spend a couple of minutes talking about, this is the point where we confuse most of our audience because I thought that the title is Coffee Sketch Podcast, and somehow they wind up talking about sports a lot. But you got to have different interests. So Jeff, I don't know what do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as much into sport as I was. I mean, there was a period where it was one fantasy league to the next, and so I was watching everything. I was not much of a gambler, but I was always into fantasy sports. Basketball, football, baseball, all those things. Now I'm just kind of back into watching it, and it helped to be an Eagles fan this year. Win the Super Bowl. So the other football.
I was wondering if we were going to get that in this episode, but
well, Jamie, back around the holidays, Jeff and I actually got to spend some time together in the Detroit area to watch the Eagles.
We did
play a playoff game, and little did I know, at that time the Lions were still in it. So at the time I was, having to toe the Michigan line, the Detroit Lions, but then I had to pivot to root for the Eagles because I just couldn't muster the energy to root for Kansas City. So, and Jamie and I have talked about that. We had a little, a day. We had a moment, talk about playoff football.
Yeah, typically we try and have like a side coffee wager, like who's going to send somebody like a care package, like if they win. Kurt doesn't usually remember that he needs to send a package like after
after he loses.
After the result.
Yeah,
but,
I'm in arrears,
as
they call it. Yeah,
like we just did March Madness.
Oh,
we did a men's and a women's bracket, and Kurt, I'm going to say, he's just gets a little excited in that first round looking at upsets. Doesn't sort of play the strategy game. So.
Yeah. Jeff, did you do any brackets?
You know what? Not this year. I mean, I guess if there's, this is more of the death of college basketball to me was, for those former Big East fans out there, when they killed the Big East, that was when I really stopped watching college basketball. Unfortunately, it was just, it felt like the beginning of the end with a lot of, the realignment. And I think that there's probably fans out there of like the Pac-10, Pac-12, whatever like that iteration was, that when you see that become just gobbled up by the Big Ten, it's hard. I would think it'd be hard to be a USC fan. Like now that you're just like part of one big like super conference, and there's all the history is just totally gone. Entire, Power 6 conference is gone, right?
Yeah.
So, I really am disappointed with the way that college sports has gone, and I think with the NIL stuff now, at some point it seemed as a boon to find a way to like pay college players, but now that money has gotten into it, it's become even more confusing, less rules, more Wild West, and I guess it brings parity when like you can bid on the highest player, but it's like all below board. You don't know why someone's going and answering the transfer portal. Maybe there's a rhyme and a reason if you were paying attention, but to me, it's put me off to some of the college football in particular. Yeah.
Yeah. I had a similar conversation over the weekend with a friend, and he's a Michigan State fan, and I'm a Trojan, USC Trojan, and we're in the off season of college football, right? And so then we both said to each other, well, we're gonna kind of gripe about it now, but then come September, we're gonna be back on the bandwagon. I mean, I'm not saying Jeff's gonna go down that road, but for me, it probably will wind up, I'll get sucked back into the energy of college football, but I totally feel your point of view in that it's not quite, definitely has not panned out the way I thought it would pan out, especially with in regard to NIL, and I don't know, Jamie, I'm sure you've got thoughts.
Oh, yeah, I got thoughts. I always have thoughts, but I will interject though, is that I love both of you talking about tradition and like pain and affiliation with like a school or a team or an alignment or a league, like all the things that I understand as well. Like, so Jeff, I'm a 49ers fan, like, because I grew up in California, and when I was a little kid,
partly.
And so carried that with me. And there was sort of, there's like, there's some rough years in there, and then there's some good years, and then there's some like little bits of disappointment, but I just share that because of the Eagles. I get it. It's not a Cowboys Eagles thing. It's more of like a Niners Eagles thing for us now. So I'm going to remember that. But I just say that sort of, that's kind of why I like soccer so much, is that you have a club, that you love. And there are years where it's just utter shit. And then, but you can't switch. Like you got to stay with who you're with, and you got to stay with them. And, we were talking a little bit about it in the green room, is like, then you have a thing like Wrexham, where not only like in the US, could you imagine if a team was in a league and they were so bad that they got dropped to the league below? And then if they were bad again, they got dropped to the league below that, and so on. Because that's what happens in England. And so Wrexham is the story of literally this past weekend of the team climbing itself out of the cellar and moving up, not just the table in a league, but also all the way out of the league into the next league. So there's promotion and relegation. And so they've been promoted 3 times in a row, which is historic. So that's why I love soccer so much. Unfortunately, in the US, we don't have promotion relegation. So folks haven't fully experienced that yet, but maybe in a long game, we will maybe see that. So there's talk of it.
Like you mean MLS?
Well, so MLS now has a competitor.
Oh.
Like, so there's because soccer has gotten, and there's markets that MLS just hasn't gotten to, but there's a need for it. Those markets had a lower division club, but now have people with money and capital and a stadium that's a possibility. So they're like, well, why can't we just like make a better league? And then in making a better league, can we kind of help create like a pipeline of other teams kind of in our region that aren't ready to play us yet, but maybe they can play together. And then they're a league below us. So that's what USL is, Kurt.
Oh,
and so USL is positioning itself now where USL is going to actually have promotion and relegation.
Oh yeah.
Which is crazy.
Well, we have our Flint Bucks are in USL
Right.
League 2, and they do pretty well. Sorry, Jeff, we've gone off. We've already just on the tangent, but anyway, so let's refocus, Jamie. Let's get back into the core tenets of the podcast. Sorry, Jeff, we have a little too much fun. Coffee. We have guest Jeff Passfoot. You go first. I know you're a coffee drinker, but what is the go-to regular on tap at the moment?
So, I mean,
in the pot.
I don't know how brands carry, but Philadelphia has a local brand called Elixir.
Ooh.
I think there's a couple of local Philly roasters. I think that the most famous one at this point is La Colombe, because it started local, but I think it's at least kind of up and down the East Coast, and it was acquired by Lake Chobani, so it started to it got a lot of corporate investment, but it was one of those that started only in Philly. So I drink La Colombe often, but Elixir is another local brand that a lot of the local coffee shops that are, Elixir has its own coffee shop, but then they sell their bags to a lot of the other ones. So that's generally what I drink. I don't know I don't see the bag, I just know that I generally can taste that it's Elixir when they serve it, but I don't know what the origin is. It's been a little while since I've kind of been on that kick of like pour overs and like specific single origin and, where it's coming from. It's just a quick thing, right? It's hard to, it's very hard to for the patience of a 5 or 6 minute pour over, unless I got nothing else to do.
Well, I know. Jamie and I both know you have young humans that you're raising. So yeah.
Yes.
Time is of the essence, right?
Well, at home, I've got my wife actually has been, not lambasting, but like, I used to drink almost like always, like French press. Like that was my Saturday and Sunday morning routine. Since we got a Keurig, it's probably sacrilege, but at home, I've drank, nice coffee all week. It's just easy for me to pop in a Keurig, and I found that Pete's Coffee, Dickinson Roast is the one that I think is like a pretty good Cape pod. So
that's cool.
See, that's good. Yeah. No, that's good because we've learned on the podcast that Kurt even has one K cup that, like, if he sees it, like, it is like, it's like liquid death. Like he's going to just completely stay away from it. So we do appreciate when one, kind of curates their whole experience and explains, which ones they're using. No judge. This is a no coffee judgment zone.
Well, I thought you were going to tease me about my tendencies toward gas station.
No, that's a different conversation. We're not even talking about being on the road. So
yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, good call, Jeff. Yeah.
But I'll say, I mean, I don't think I'm a snob, but I won't drink bad coffee. I'll just, like, even if I need the fix, like, I won't take the caffeine just because I need it. Like, I just won't do it.
There goes the bus, Jamie.
Yeah, that's that bus just rolled right back over us.
No, I think it's just me, right?
Well, I mean, I'm on the road quite a bit. I'm, and the standards kind of drop, because it's like there's just need.
You have Buc-ee's. We don't have Buc-ee's up here in Michigan.
I do have Buc-ee's. We do sort of route our trips to make sure we're near.
But this is why we bring friends like Jeff on, right? Because he's maintaining the standard. It's like, I'm not gonna, I won't cave, right? So,
but he's also bringing the reality of the little people and and there's the during the week, and then there's the weekend, and sort of reassessing one's life choices related to coffee, and that's okay. It's totally okay. We get it.
So Jamie, what about you then? What's in the cup today?
So today I'm going to go local also. After my little return to Little City in Austin, I got a different one. Kind of went through that Virgil one that I was telling you about that had kind of the interesting kind of notes on it. And so this is a Brazilian one. I wrote it down because I can't, me with pronunciations, it's terrible. Sítio dos Cedros. That's not bad. I almost got it. But what I liked about it was it like purposely like said the word sweet a bunch of times, and I don't do the sweet coffee, so I'm like, I love Little City coffee. I like, normally Brazilian coffee to me is sort of a nice medium roast. And so I was like, why would they keep saying sweet? I'll just buy it and try it and see if it's any good. And yeah, I actually can say that it has like a little bit of a jasmine kind of flavor in the background. But I like it.
Is it sweet? Or is it?
Oh, it's sweet. Yeah. But I also take my coffee black. So, I mean, it's not like I'm adding stuff to it anyway. So.
Fair. Yeah. Well, that's cool. Little City. I'm a fan, I guess, but I'm the one in the O to deliver coffee. So it'll probably be a while since I see some Little City from Jamie.
I might send one part of the embargo. We have like our whole demilitarized zone for coffee for Kurt, and so sometimes we reach across the border and send him a bag.
Oh, well, thanks. So I'm also into some local stuff. A newer one for us on the podcast that Jamie's heard a little bit about. But they're called Fireside Roasters, which is they're technically just outside the city limits of Flint, but we still kind of embrace them in the Flint area. And they actually had a roast that is of Guatemalan origin, and since I am partly of Guatemalan origin, I just had to buy it, and I've already got stuff on deck, but I won't talk about what's coming up next because I haven't tasted it yet, so I don't want to. Although I'll tell you the name. It's called Dark Matter. Kind of excited. So stay tuned for that one.
Yeah, that's like the new Pearl Jam album. So that's good. We'll hear about that.
Is that literally the name, or are you just making fun?
Yes.
There's new cool Pearl Jam. Oh.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Let's all get our Gen X. I don't know, Jeff. You're Gen X too, right? You're like on the edge, right? A little cusp.
I mean, I guess depending on who you ask, but I am Xennial, whatever you want to, whatever that kind of.
Yeah.
I think by most accounts I'm a millennial, but I think that if you look at people, who are 10 years younger than me, I feel disconnected from them.
10 years away from them. Sounds good. Yeah. Well, that's what I was just trying to pick up off your sentiment of the Pearl Jam, seeing where it was going.
Yeah, I think that there's certain. Sure, like you're an artist, you want to be able to continue to create music. There are very few artists that I think I could name that after their seminal period, they produced something that was really worthy of listening to. So I don't want to tell people to hang up their boots, but I don't know. There's something about it that it's very difficult to accept new music, 30 years later, and feel like it's going to have the same, effect, maybe on a new generation, but I don't know. It's tough.
Yeah. No. Yeah. We've had these kinds of conversations, and they're all to be determined, right? Sort of let it ride. So, Jamie's giving me little taps on the shoulder. I have a sketch. So let me drop the sketch. I want to flash. It's a bit of a surprise sketch. It is one of Jamie's, but
and I do want to say is that normally too is by now we have given our guests the opportunity to kind of more fully introduce themselves.
Sure.
I think because we did our extra long banter And
Yeah.
it's been a minute since we've had a guest on the show. So we will just, note to self. But no, I mean, thank you, Jeff, for joining us. We have talked about having you on for a little while, and so timing worked out. So we kind of accelerated everything really quickly. But now we've got, I'm in Austin, Kurt's in Flint, and then you're in Philly, and we've all known each other for, gosh, like at least 10 years now. And so I was just going to say is like, can you kind of, give a bit of your origin story and kind of, and then we can kind of connect the dots and talk a little bit more architecture.
Yeah, I guess it's always a tough, depending on the audience. I guess this is, mostly architects, but there's the origin of like from school on or from YAF on. What's kind of the
well, I say it's like, I mean, so are you native Philly, or are you like, is it like as close to being native Philly as you can be?
Yeah, I grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia, so but I've always, I would say, other than the 5 years I was at Syracuse, in New York, I've been in Pennsylvania and outside Philadelphia or inside Philadelphia my whole life.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah,
so that's a little bit of.
I was going to say neither Kurt nor I can relate to that, because we kind of grew up in places and that we have affinities for, but we've certainly moved around a lot, not just for school, and then find ourselves now living in places that, for all intents and purposes, we didn't really have any family ties to. Kurt's wife's family is from Flint and Michigan, but ourselves not necessarily so.
Well, so Jeff, why don't you tell us what you do now? And I'm sure we'll probably unpack a little bit of, I mean, obviously, well, not obviously, but for the listeners, we all know each other from our various AIA involvement, our American Institute of Architects Committee involvement, and primarily the Young Architects Forum, which Jeff alluded to as the YAF. And so we've served on the AIA and sort of grew that relationship, I guess over 10 years now at least. But now I know a little bit about what you've been up to lately, but I don't know if Jamie does, and I know our listeners don't. So why don't you talk about, because this might be a good segue to what, maybe we talk about the sketch a little bit, and I know we want to let you get back to your life without dragging this conversation on too long. So, but yeah, as an architect and a fellow of the American Institute of Architects, I know you are practicing a little bit, let's say, outside, not just outside of architecture, but in the development world too, right, Jeff? Is that
so what? Maybe I'll start from that story, right? And so, there were a couple of years that I've always been very invested in architecture. I've always enjoyed being an architect, but there was a period, now going probably back 8 years, where I started looking around and said, like, what else can I do? What else do I want to do? And I think that there was in Philadelphia, I think a lot of people are, and I know Kurt is familiar with the firm Onion Flats, who has now, they've modified, they have some founders, were retiring and looking for other things. But for years, they were a model of how, architect-led development can happen, in Philadelphia, but also nationwide. But there were still not a lot of those types of architects who jumped over to the other side. And they were full in, right? They were doing their own development, but also building their own projects, right? So it was kind of this like very unique thing, and it was great that it was happening in Philly. So like I kind of had a front seat to that. Sometimes they were constantly getting attention from our Inquirer critic, Inga Saffron, who I think is kind of at this point still hanging on as one of the few architectural critics in the country, right? So it still feels great to have kind of that perspective and opinion locally, where again I think
you probably can count them on like one hand now. So yeah, exactly.
And so I was kind of following their trajectory for years, and I'm like, how do I get into that? There's always that thought in my head. How do I get into that? And but they were always a small shop. It was always hard to just get into if I want to work for them, it's like, they had a 4-person team for years. It was very difficult to actually work for them. And so in 2016, the Rose Fellowship, which has since been sunset, which is kind of a shame, but the Rose Fellowship, which had a couple decade run at an Enterprise, was bringing a fellowship to Philly for the first time. And so for years it was like you would kind of apply if you're accepted, and they kind of ship you to where they had a need, right? So I never felt I was in a position where that was like what I wanted to do, where I could just go where I was sent. But when it was coming to Philly, it's like, let me take a hand at this. I think this is interesting. And I kind of went all in, like really started thinking, like, how do I put my whole self into this application? Because it was a very intensive application process. You had to get references, portfolio. It felt very much like almost like applying to it's a fellowship. So it was more, but it was more than just a job interview. It was like, it felt like a highly competitive process. And kind of from what I was told, it was like 150 applications. I was selected as a finalist. And I think there were like 20 finalists or so for like all the open positions across the country. And they chose like 8 of us that would have been like for the Philly one specifically. And it was kind of this eye-opening experience. I thought that I was like at some level too old. I mean, again, if you're familiar with the Rose Fellowship, a lot of the people that were doing it were like fresh out of school. Most of them had grad school experience. At that point in time, I had been working for 10 years. I felt like I was much older than a lot of the other applicants, and I actually thought that was a disadvantage at some point. But one of our other friends, Larry Fabroni, was someone that I confided with, and he was like, why the hell not? Why wouldn't you go for this? He convinced me that like I could do it. I talked to Wayne Mortensen. He put me in touch with Wayne, who was a former Rose Fellow, and Wayne thought it was I don't know if he remembers that conversation, but I remember it, that he kind of like also said, hey, you sound like the right person. Why don't you go for it? And again, so getting selected as a finalist, kind of validated, like, hey, this is like a unique thing. And the goal would have been to place architects in community development corporation like offices that traditionally didn't have design as part of their kind of talent or their roster, right? Mm-hmm. So only developers, only finance people, they always struggled with necessarily how do we scale up, and so it was always a great fit for the places that they went. So great experience. It was cool. Like I had like a finalist summit, got to meet all the other fellows, got to meet all like the top brass of Enterprise. So like Katie Swenson, who was at the time, now she's the mass principal, but like she was like one of the leads and one of the like the most famous fellows from the beginning. So we got to meet all these great people. And I'm like, and when I didn't ultimately I wasn't selected. I think it went to someone who was very qualified, who's still in Philadelphia. But it was like, I had this taste. I'm like, this is really what I want to do. It's more than just architecture, but having an architecture design background was the thing that would have prepped me to get into this space. And from there on, it was kind of like, well, how do I find this same thing? What do I do? And started looking. It's very difficult to find those opportunities again, particularly with like all the other fringe things that would come with it, right? It was like, and the Enterprise Rose Fellowship came with an alumni network. There was a lot of other benefits that would have been, hey, if you graduated from here, you went through it, you'd have this kind of like lifelong friendships you would have made. It's not just a job. So couldn't really find anything. Ended up leaving, went to a place, as Kurt knows, a firm called Bright Common, which was doing a lot of passive house work, and it was one of the kind of the top firms in Philly and really in the region doing passive house in Philadelphia. And I said, this may not be what I was specifically looking for, but I was looking for the next challenge about how do I apply everything I've done. And it happened to be, we were doing a lot of affordable housing, we were doing passive house. It was like this combination of a lot of great interests and skill sets that I had, and they wanted to scale their business up from doing single family to, mid, not missing middle necessarily, but like we were doing a lot of infill lots. Like we wanted to do like the 15 to 20 to 25 unit building, but the principal was only doing like a lot of single family duplexes, but he wanted to bring in someone more experienced to do larger, scale it up. And there was always this tinge that like Jeremy Evelino was the principal and still is the principal, but he like had a design build background himself, and there was this like hint that maybe we would get into it. Never. It was just always difficult as a small firm. So then I think that when the pandemic hit, it was a challenge for everybody. But I kind of found myself in a position where I really needed something stable from a career standpoint. And while I always worked in kind of small firm, almost my whole career was in small firms, I just realized how much like hand to mouth that some of this stuff can be. And I said, well, let me look for something what I think might be a little more stable, can weather some of these storms, would have more growth opportunities, because even though I felt very connected to firm leadership, there wasn't really a lot of those advancement opportunities of like, what's the next step if I keep growing, and whether it's salary or not, like I wanted more. And so I started looking around. This is kind of where I didn't find anything else that I felt was really interesting in traditional architecture practice. And a developer was looking for someone who had a lot of CA experience and had an interest in development, but mostly like the construction side of things. And I had done a lot of CA in my life. It was like a slog when I was going through it, but I felt like once I got on the other side and realized that, hey, I really understand how these buildings go together because I was on site so much. It's because I had to form these relationships with contractors. I had to really understand, like break through that, like the headbutting, like the traditional, like architect contractor, experience. I feel I found a way to break bread with them and like build relationships. So like it was never a finger point. I never pointed fingers at the GC in all my years of doing CA as an architect. Now things have gotten a little more challenging when I'm on the other side. But as the architect, like I felt like these are the people that I need to make fast friends with. And I felt they actually ended up having my back in a lot of scenarios. Like we both know that maybe something was like missed, but we would find a way to cover it up so the owner at that time wouldn't figure it out, right? Like he would say, we both got egg on our face. Let's try to resolve this without, blaming each other. And
without jeopardizing the whole project, right? At that point, you're like, we still got to finish. Like we still got to get to the end. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't want you saying, oh, the architect's drawings were like missing something, and I'm not going to say, hey, you guys like screwed this up. So we would find a way to make it work. So I feel like I had a couple of these like skills that I developed along the way that, when the opportunity came along for it, I would be kind of in the field managing GCs from the owner side. It's like, I think I can do this, right? It wasn't just like fake it till you make it. I actually had this experience, even if it wasn't, on paper. Yes, I've done exactly the thing you've asked for. I've done almost all of the things in some capacity that I think I can figure this out. And so that kind of brings me to where I am today. So the last 4 years I've been with, a real estate firm. And I still feel very connected to architecture because I am, in many respects, like a lot of our legacy projects I was taking through, but like the new ones, I'm the one doing all the entitlements, right? I'm the one going and making sure we do zoning, and I'm doing the zoning analysis and the building code analysis, feasibility studies, like a lot of that front end stuff that I would have been doing and always wanted to do even further ahead as an architect, right? We always talk about how do we get further upstream? How do we get in that room? Well, I'm there now. I'm there when we go look at sites and they ask my opinion. I'm there when they say, how many units can this support? I know I do a lot of work in Philly, so like I know the zoning code really well. And it's because like I can kind of look at stuff. I can look at a piece of ground and like actually somewhat estimate quickly without even looking at the code. This is how much I think we could do. So that's still very interesting to me. It's less about design, but it's more about how do we make these projects pencil? How do we figure out like the early puzzle, and less about the design. But that's kind of where my space is. Maybe has always been, but I enjoy
But
it.
it's still design thinking. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the whole thing. I think that Kurt and I have spent a little bit of time of late, kind of circling back. Both of us have taught. Have you ever taught by any chance, or a studio or a class?
Not officially, no, I've not taught in your sense. I mean, I think I've tried to do a lot of portfolio reviews. Well, that's not teaching. Like I was brought in by a professor sometimes to do like that as almost like a workshop. So I've done some like somewhat instruction, but not a full, let me teach a class, let me grade it, let me write a curriculum, that kind of stuff.
Right. Well, that's not the fun part. The fun part is, well, the reason why I say is I think, you describing your own trajectory and kind of those realizations along the way of the skills that you're bringing to the table now, that you even, to some degree, you knew that you had from the beginning, but you kind of honed them and they developed in kind of different ways. That's a lot of what both of us have found ourselves when we're in a teaching role, talking to students, because you're dealing with a pool of people who are all pursuing quote unquote the same education, but every single one of them is going to end up in a different spot, career wise. And a lot, hopefully and fortunately in architecture, but a lot using that sort of design thinking that we all go through, that training, that really does allow itself to problem solve like the way you're talking about it. Even in the job that I'm in now, I find that some of our best and highest and best use of my time is that early discussion, with a property owner or a city, or, thinking strategically about what's the best use for this site, and how do we get there from here? Like what are the dots we still have to connect, and then what are the gaps? And it sounds like some of that is the work that you're doing, kind of, now, which to me is still design thinking. Even if you're not drawing kind of, quote unquote drawing stuff, I still think that there's a lot that you're still bringing to the table, kind of in that same through line.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say the same thing. I mean, these are your examples of your trajectory, as Jamie said, are what lately I've been trying to impress upon my students, since I'm currently teaching and practicing and trying to sort of navigate, the foot in both worlds, but trying to explain use my real world examples and explain to students how there are so many more potential avenues in practice to go through. And I think your pathway is a good example of how you have evolved through the quote unquote traditional practice, which is the design and uh, construction documents, the design side versus the construction side, and then you've moved over to the construction development side. And so yeah, but I think in general though, the key, like Jamie said again, is the visualization. You even Jeff, you said it, like you looking at a lot and knowing enough about the zoning to be able to say, oh, well, I think this lot could bear XYZ, type of building. And let me flash the sketch. I know, because I know we're getting tight on time.
But as he's pulling up the sketch, I just want to say one more thing, Jeff. The thing that I really appreciate the way you sort of describe, something that you almost got as being sort of the moment that you needed to do the things you're doing now. Like, I think that's just brilliant. I think it's just brilliant. And even just as you were describing it, and I didn't know that, I knew bits of that story, but I didn't know that whole story. And it makes so much more sense to me now, kind of knowing what you're doing. And I think the other part of it is that I love is that, you, like so many friends and colleagues, when describing like them searching for their place in architecture, quote unquote, is all of us or at least it's like I've found myself in like an affinity group of some, some nebulous sort where we all kind of have done that deep dive on firms or practices or architects that we encounter and are like, keep finding ourselves following, and because there's an interest there in kind of what they're doing or how they're working, and it doesn't all kind of add up to us at first. Like we're like this is interesting to me, but I don't get it. I need to figure out some more, or talk to some more people, or read a little bit more. And then as you find yourself keeping going back to those same kind of case studies almost, it kind of propels you forward in both your own career, but then getting closer to what that thing that interested you to begin with, in those architects and in those firms. And I think that's just it. Kurt and I have talked about it as the maturing designer, and that maturing doesn't mean age. It just means like there's literally a maturation process, like, and it takes a little while. Sometimes it's faster, or it has spits and spurts. But I love that kind of about the way you kind of describe that trajectory. So,
and so let me just tee up a little bit of why I thought of the recent sketches that Jamie has done. This could be applicable, but so we on this show, Jamie and I talk about a lot about what he does lately with the historic office in Texas. Is this sort of imagination or visualization of potential futures for sites, and in a lot of cases for Jamie, right, they're like existing buildings that may need something additional. And I know Jamie could probably give us the background on like this sketch, but this I imagine is kind of like what's sort of ruminating in Jeff's brain, is like any one of us could kind of do this too. But you look at a corner or a site or condition, and you go, okay, well, this site could bear this particular project and activate the space. And so I thought this could fit in with the conversation a little bit. I know it's a bit of a surprise for you two, so I maybe Jamie, you give us a quick like what is it, what for, and then Jeff can add to it.
Well, and I'll just say, I'll preface this, Jeff, is that when he said to us earlier, I've got a surprise for you, I was worried it was going to be the lightning round, because he has done that before, where it's just like, it's like a Pechacuchla style, where like it like pops on the screen, and then Kurt says, "Tell me about how you feel about this drawing." It's like almost like a Rorschach test, where it's like, here's this drawing, and tell me what you feel about it, and then we move on to the next one, and it's like it just seems like a blur. So yeah. I'm glad it's not that.
I didn't want to torture Jeff with that would be a bit too much into the deep end of the pool, but yeah. No, we just have the one sketch. I thought it would be a nice segue to a visual, but I mean, I think it builds on Jeff's story about the visualization, the design thinking, the solving, and then the tool of the sketch as a way to convey that kind of information. So, Jamie, what is this? Partly existing, or I assume it's kind of like a part existing, part new sort of thing.
Yeah, it's a unique site. It's one of those ones where the building that you see, the 2-story porch on the front, clearly a historic building, just because form and function. The porch actually isn't there anymore, so this is me sort of already going back and figuring out, yes, there was this kind of pole mounted porch on this particular building, and it kind of needed it kind of as a new entry element, because it was sort of not, there was no cover for pedestrians. So there was a lot of design thinking and sort of and just practicality of why that was needed. But I think what you're sort of alluding to with the site is there's these sort of interesting forms that are clearly from a different, time period than the other building. And some of this is existing, and this is sometimes it's, a lot of the work we do is we're balancing both what's there and sort of what the current scope of work is. And, knowing that a particular project doesn't have the budget to do like the full on new investment, and sort of pure redevelopment of a site. Sometimes it's how can you take what's there and adapt it for a better function. And I'm curious, from the work that you're doing, Jeff, are all yours more on the clean slate kind of tabula rasa site, or do you deal with sort of existing structures, and how does that evaluation go kind of in your, or would go in kind of your, current role?
Yeah, I mean, it not every site I deal with is a a raw piece of land, right? Some of them are existing buildings. Now, I say some of the ones that we've acquired recently, like our tear downs. There's something that is just a single, like one was this like a poultry, slaughterhouse. That's not really easy to retrofit that into any other use, right? So, it's past its use. It's a post-industrial corridor. This thing, there's just no other use but to tear it down. It's also in disrepair, right? So, maybe that hurt your heart a little bit, Jamie, but there are certain buildings that just don't have the same reuse capacity as others. But I would say that generally speaking, though, it's not off the table that we'll look at sites that have buildings and see how can we reuse these. And I think that's something, it's common to see warehouse conversions. I think that was, still happening. It seemed to be more in vogue, the last 15 to 20 years, when particularly in, like, say, a city like Philadelphia, there are a dime a dozen, right? You might have just tons of just vacant warehouses just littered, throughout the, a kind of expansive, Northeast. I don't know how well Philadelphia, but you can find these massive, 500,000 square foot warehouses just that have been sitting there for 50 years. No one's taken them, but eventually the price is low enough and you can stomach the remediation you have to go through to say this is worth it. It's right. It's now in the hot neighborhood, and to tear it down will be not whether it's a travesty or not, but there's so many bones you can use of this. There's no reason to tear it down, right? And
well, it's the embodied energy discussion, right? And so at some point, from a design thinking point of view, is and I agree. I mean, there are some buildings that. So here's the way I would sort of preface, or kind of respond to what you were saying about like hurting my heart is like, yes, it does, but it's sometimes it's more of, if you have a particular project in mind for an area or a site or a client, and you're looking at several properties for something like that, there are certainly going to be certain properties that are like, everything lines up on this one, except that the floor plates aren't going to, they're not going to be adaptively reused the way we want for our particular function. We're having to do so much gymnastics to make this building work in its current state, and it's in a poor state to begin with. There's all the strikes start lining up on the disadvantage column. I agree, like that. Those situations exist. But I think it's interesting. I'm just sort of curious. Is there, in anecdotally, how have you seen it now as a design thinker, architect, having that? Do you talk about kind of carbon use and sort of reuse of buildings? Does that enter into your discussions, as a group, and then maybe the people you're working with?
I mean, the short answer is no, not the carbon use. I think so you have to cut. This is where even people who on the development side, even those who are, I want to say, like, part of the cause, but like they are open to certain things. Like, I think that we are open to like reusing things and doing things in a more sustainable way until the price tag hits. So you kind of have to like turn it on its head and say, it's cheaper to keep it, right? Like, find like what is the best way to reuse this, and if it is because the structure exists and you're already at and you can chop $50 a foot off like building something else new, then that's where things start to work out. And that's where, like, if you have, architects or people thinking about that on the inside, I think that there's a benefit to having this thinking in other development firms, maybe not holistically, but if you had one architect in every firm, I think you could make some of these decisions, and you can steer the conversation towards, this is why we should keep the building. We can run an analysis that says, take the carbon conversation out of it, even if it is the ultimate goal.
Right.
The cost of maintaining that structure, and maybe you don't have to do as much, again, remediation, because you can encapsulate it versus tear it down and then just dispose of all the stuff, all the asbestos and lead that you just collapsed. Like, there are conversations and ways to frame it that actually, are in favor of saving existing buildings that may still achieve the carbon reduction and the embodied energy without having to say those words.
And that I am all with you on. Like, absolutely, is that there's I think it's, to me, they're a lot smarter people than myself, like, need to kind of set their, like, hills that they're going to die on and windmills that they're going to tilt. They need to set that aside, and if they want to achieve those goals, they have to be sneaky about it, for lack of a better term, and realize that, like what you're describing, is you can still achieve those goals, but you also have to address all these other issues in a practical sense to really move the needle. And I think who better to do that than, like you say, having an architect in the room, who's going to go, well, we really, this is one that, like, has some historic value there. This would be a waste on the carbon, but I got to figure out how to make the economics of this. I got to make that other argument. I got to make a series of other arguments. They've got to be there. Like, what are those ones that need to come to the fore of the discussion? And, and not tilt that windmill over there and got everybody all riled up and believing I'm crazy,
Well, I think it just exemplifies the complexity of even what might be thought of as one decision, right, to build or not to build, or something, pick something, and what goes into, there's multiple decisions that actually do evolve or aggregate into the whole project, right? And that's the thing I try and impress that upon students too. I get, again, going back to the students, even though they're still trying to grasp, like, finals week next week, but, like, what happens in practice, right? And what's the snowball effect of one decision going on down the line to other questions and decisions to be made. And I think that's, again, like Jeff said, and we're trying to kind of putting Jeff in the hot seat, but having the architect in the room and on the team, I think, only makes that conversation easier to have, or at least more fruitful.
Well, put that sketch back up, because I think Jeff can appreciate maybe this kind of conversation and sort of that aha moment from a strategy point of view.
Oh, did you say put the sketch back up? Is that what
yeah? So, like, you sort of see the pre-engineered metal building, kind of superstructure kind of doubled up on the left side of the image, but you can see that it's just the superstructure, right? And it's sort of got a cover, and then there's sort of a little bit of intervention sort of being suggested below it, and but it's sort of stripped to the skeleton and then clearly being kind of altered. What just the setup to this was, the project owner owned the whole site, so kind of multiple buildings, and they also had a distinct parking need that they needed to house on site. But they didn't need the whole thing for parking, but they didn't have any parking. And so, or didn't have enough. So they also wanted to cover some of their parking and maybe do solar or something like that. So they were entertaining a couple different ideas. And so they were like, well, these buildings are old and special, the ones on the right, and we can wrap our heads around renovating those. Hey, Jamie, will you help us renovate these and like help us figure out how to get the program in these buildings and et cetera. But, you know, these other buildings are trash. And so I was like, yeah, but wait a second. Did you just say that you need to cover some parking and you have these other things and you've got these big metal buildings over here? You know, can I take a shot at it and start having this sort of discussion, you know, about kind of what the need is and sort of what the balance is, even though they themselves couldn't wrap their heads around that they might have more options than they're thinking about.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point. And because they had you as an asset, right, that maybe you're doing this for free, right? I think it's hard to like ask for an architect to be hired to tell them that. But if you have the ability to get those opinions, it can really go in a different direction. And so, like, to that point, yeah, if I was presented with, hey, here's a site, so I'm in house, so like they're not paying me extra to like opine on certain things, I might give an idea of how they could reuse the space, and it could achieve a goal that maybe I personally had, right? Like we want to reuse it. We didn't want to tear it down, all that other stuff. But again, it wasn't a thought before, and it may actually end up creating more value overall by bringing in a designer to ask that question. So,
do you find that now that you're in this role in this particular company, and doing it for a couple of years, do you find that have you found other colleagues kind of doing a similar thing that you're doing?
So I mean, there isn't like a cadre that I have like some sort of private chat with them, but like I'm seeing more developers bringing on architects. I'm trying to think of it. I don't think there's any examples that you would necessarily know, but I'm seeing others, even larger developers who have, added architects to their staff, or they might have in-house, design staff, because sometimes they're doing the work themselves. Most often not. It's a challenge. There's actually a classmate of mine moved to Philly and started working for a bigger corporation. Again, I don't think you know any of these firms. Brandywine Realty Investment is the firm, and they do a lot of stuff in Philly. But they wanted to, I guess, because they were doing so much work and they have they're more like office owners. They wanted to do a lot of their own fit outs. So instead of hiring a third firm, they brought him in to kind of start an internal thing. But then he got into this thing of like, well, in Pennsylvania, you still have to kind of be like a separate entity to sign and seal drawings. So he figured it out, but it's like, it's a weird dynamic that like they're actually trying to do this, but then they can't. They have to still have like a company within the company. But it shows like there are more firms that I'm seeing that are at least bringing on at least one person that has a design background to kind of head, all of their design and construction, instead of it being more of a finance person who is like the client lead. And I think that has led, I think it's a better project. So the architects that I work with, I mean, almost to a T, have, unprompted, have come up to say, hey, this process I think has gone better because I get to talk to you and we can talk things out. Because traditionally, if you were talking to someone who doesn't understand it as well and only talks about, is this going to cost more money? It ends up being a more difficult conversation. And so, yeah, the architects I work with enjoy having me on the team.
So basically, you're looking for members of your secret society to join you.
Yeah.
This is a call. This is a call.
This is the call to action, folks. Jeff just we'll put his info in the show notes. But no, I appreciate you sort of describing it that way too. Is that I think that because my experience with it in sort of seeing colleagues kind of go onto a development team or something like that, or even myself, I've had some developers who at different points kind of said, hey, have you thought about, coming over and And some of those like felt, for lack of a better word, like where they were trying to get me on the cheap, like kind of get me in house to do like sort of that tenant fit out work kind of stuff that you're describing, which I think is sort of the more common, but I think, but I don't think that's, the norm necessarily. I think it is maybe more common, but I think there is a trend where the value add that you've described about how your experience is and sort of the way you're approaching the work. I think that's where things are really headed. As a profession, I think that, that sort of, I think you said it very, very early in this conversation, is kind of getting upstream, in
Right,
that
yeah.
development timeline, and, and realizing the architect can be there, and bring lots of skills and a whole different perspective about the problem solving. Not to say that the other problem solving isn't value, there isn't value in it. It's just we naturally just approach all this stuff a little different. It's just wherever we went to school doesn't matter. It's just sort of it's ingrained in sort of our mode of thinking, and I think that it's a little bit untapped potential for the profession, and I'm really excited for you to be hearing about what you're doing, and and hopefully we get to hear more about it.
I think, and I just want to, I'm going to give Jeff the last word, since we've approached the top of the hour and we've absorbed enough of his time, and we appreciate you joining us. And I will say, I'll hand it over to you, Jeff, for the last word. Don't forget to remind our listeners how to find you, either on social media or whatever communication, bat signals that you want to leave out there. And yeah, and then also, if you had anything to add to Jamie's last comment there.
Yeah, it's the last word. I feel like there's a couple different threads I could go with. I guess I'll say that right now I'm primarily active mostly on LinkedIn, so that just searching my name, you could find me. Unfortunately, I really love Twitter at some point, but it's just become difficult to use it. Anyway, we don't have to go down that path, but I never really took to Instagram the same way. Because a lot of my things that I'm doing now are more word heavy and text heavy. I feel like I'm not creating I don't take a lot of photos necessarily that are like Instagram worthy. So I think LinkedIn right at the moment is where you're going to find my thoughts on stuff. So I'll tease this. But I do think that when you get into like this idea of like what's another path or what's another business model, I think that the thing that I think is interesting, that whether your architects out there that are listening and want a taste, I think that there are a lot of skills that we have that can lend itself to being in development, and like it's worth taking. It's easy for me to say, like sitting here, I'm not actually putting equity in a lot of these projects, right? I'm on the payroll, I'm doing work, I'm doing it well, but I'm not necessarily putting my skin in the game at the moment. But I've thought about it over the years. I would like to take a jump at some point. I've owned real estate, right? So I never developed fresh, but I have owned, my own. I still have a rental unit, so I still kind of know a little bit about like what it means to do that. But there's this kind of concept that I'm thinking about, like if especially if you're Kurt, you're in Flint, people in Akron, people in markets that if you could buy a lot for $5,000, having patient capital is like the type of thing that allows you the time and space to like experiment. Like it's very difficult to go and spend right now. A lot of like even areas that are still developing in Philadelphia, you might have to spend $100,000 to get a piece of not that great land, right? And the rule of thumb, and if you're trying to make a single family house, you'd have to sell that for roughly $500,000. That's 20% of your total hard costs, should be land. And so it's difficult to jump into like more mature markets. But if there's emerging markets out there that you're willing to take a risk and you could say, hey, I can sit on this. I can pay the like $100 a year in taxes. I can take like, maybe some lean risk, whatever that is. And I think you could decide that, all right, if I have time, spend the time to get it entitled. You as the architect know how to draw a set of plans, get a zoning approval. Maybe you want to actually go through the process to get a zoning variance. If you take on that extra little bit of risk and get that land approved through a zoning variance, and there's more value to this thing, well, all of a sudden the thing that you spent $5,000 on and you put your own equity in, you could even sell that set of plans for $25,000. There aren't enough architects thinking in that realm, I think, at the moment. It may seem like, hey, that's not what I do. I want to design. But if you think about how you can get involved in built environment things, that's a kind of thing that you could make some quick money, theoretically, right? Let's even if it's a 2-year investment. If you made a 300% return in 2 years, that's great money spent. And it's stuff that you didn't have to bring in anybody else necessarily to help you with, right? If you could get the zoning approval and sell a set of plans that are already, approved. So that's the kind of thinking that I think that more architects should get into. And I think that there's low risk ways to get involved. That's my little note to maybe end on.
Yeah.
Happy to talk about it more, but I have thoughts about
it. No, I mean, like it's your, we talked about imagining the possibilities. I mean, that's the skill you're bringing to bear, right? You're imagining the possibilities for these, emerging markets and bringing those skills to bear to it, but, overlaying it with this sort of development and economic model that, and your call to action. More of us have those skills, but we're not necessarily thinking about the problem that way. And I think you're encouraging that in very, very, very eloquently. So Kurt is now like telling Danielle, like after the call, hey, I just talked to my friend Jeff and I've got this idea.
So one more thing on top of that, right? I know that was a good note to end on, but I'll at the risk of like stepping on my own message, but if you also think about like we talk about how we don't want to get do design competitions because we don't, we're not getting paid. Well, here's an opportunity that if you buy the piece of land yourself, you are furthering your own idea and selling it, right? So like, again, you could still be selling just a set of approved documents, but at the end of the day, that is a real project that you did, and you kind of can control your own fate. That if you design something great, someone might say, I want that, and be able to sell it, and it has value to it because it's still tied to the piece of land that you bought, you entitled, you improved. If you're willing to put a little bit of risk into it, I think there could be a big reward on some of these emerging markets out there.
Wow. Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think we definitely got to bring you back on at some point, as a repeat, because there's so many more things that we could really go down and deeper. So
yeah,
but Jeff, thanks for joining us, and everyone go find him on LinkedIn to get more gold, to mine more gold from Jeff. But all right,
great. Well, thanks for having me, guys. And I'll see you on the other side.